Tyler Anderson lived his entire life believing he was untouchable. Every challenge, every risk, every moment that made others pause. He'd flash that signature grin and say the words that would haunt him forever. Come on, it's just a game. But games have rules, and gravity doesn't negotiate. Life has a way of teaching us that our confidence can become our greatest enemy. This is the story of a man who learned too late that some games are played for keeps. Tyler Anderson was the kind of person who made life look effortless. At 32, he had the lean build of someone who stayed active without ever setting foot in a gym. Sandy brown hair that somehow always looked perfectly tousled, and eyes that sparkled with the kind of mischief that made people both envious and worried about him in equal measure. Growing up in suburban Denver, Tyler had been the kid who climbed the tallest trees while his friends watched from below, their voices carrying a mixture of admiration and concern. "Be careful, Tyler," they'd call up to him. And every single time, without fail, he'd look down, with that easy smile and shout back, "Relax, it's just a game!" This wasn't just boyish bravado, it was Tyler's fundamental philosophy. Life, to him, was one giant playground where the worst thing that could happen was scraping a knee or getting a timeout. His parents, Maria and Kenneth, had long since given up trying to rein him in. They'd learned that Tyler had an almost supernatural ability to land on his feet, no matter how high he climbed or how far he leaped. In high school, while his classmates stressed over SATs and college applications, Tyler treated academics like an elaborate puzzle designed for his entertainment. "It's just a game," he'd tell his girlfriend Rebecca when she found him playing video games the night before a major exam. Somehow, he'd still pull a B+ out of thin air, leaving teachers shaking their heads, and Rebecca simultaneously impressed and frustrated. College brought more of the same. Tyler studied business, not because he had any particular passion for it, but because it seemed like the kind of degree that would keep his options open. He joined the rock climbing club, not for the technical challenge, but because hanging off cliff faces gave him the same rush he'd felt in those childhood trees. His clubmates would spend hours discussing safety protocols, equipment checks, and weather conditions. Tyler would listen with one ear while his mind wandered, occasionally interjecting with his trademark phrase when the conversation got too serious. "You guys act like this is life or death," he'd laugh, adjusting his harness with casual confidence. "Come on, it's just a game." After graduation, Tyler fell into a job at a tech startup where his easy confidence and natural charisma made him a perfect fit for client relations. He had a gift for making complicated software solutions sound simple and exciting, treating every pitch meeting like a friendly conversation rather than a make-or-break business presentation. His colleagues marveled at his ability to stay relaxed under pressure, never knowing that Tyler genuinely didn't feel pressure the way they did. To him, work was just another elaborate game with interesting challenges and occasional rewards. But it wasn't just professional situations where Tyler's philosophy manifested. He drove a little too fast on mountain highways, shrugging off Rebecca's white-knuckled grip on the door handle. He'd make impulsive decisions about weekend trips, booking flights to destinations he'd never researched because half the fun is figuring it out when you get there. He'd try extreme sports on vacation with minimal instruction, charming worried instructors with his confidence and apparent natural ability. Friends and family had different reactions to Tyler's approach to life. Some found it infectious, his ability to find joy and adventure in mundane situations, his refusal to let anxiety dictate his choices. Others worried constantly, seeing a man who seemed determined to test fate at every opportunity. Rebecca, who had been with him since college, often found herself caught between admiration for his fearlessness and genuine concern for his safety. "Don't you ever worry?" she'd ask him after particularly nerve-wracking adventures. "About what?" Tyler would respond genuinely puzzled. "Life's too short to spend it worried about stuff that probably won't happen anyway. Besides," and here would come that familiar grin, "it's all just a game, right?" The irony was that Tyler's confidence was largely justified by his track record. He'd never been seriously injured, never faced real consequences for his casual approach to risk. Every close call reinforced his belief that he was somehow blessed with better luck or faster reflexes than everyone else. When other people talked about learning from their mistakes, Tyler would nod politely while privately thinking that mistakes were just another word for not paying attention to the game. This pattern continued for years. Tyler lived charmed, life after charmed life, collecting stories and experiences that made him the center of attention at parties. He was the guy who had hang glided over the Swiss Alps on a whim, who had talked his way into exclusive events, who had once spent an entire weekend lost in the Amazon rainforest, and emerged with nothing but great stories and a slight tan. By the time he reached his early 30s, Tyler had built an entire identity around being the person who didn't sweat the small stuff, or the big stuff for that matter. His apartment was filled with photos and souvenirs from adventures that would have terrified most people. His social media presence was a carefully curated collection of extreme sports, spontaneous travels, and moments that captured him grinning in the face of obvious danger. But perhaps most telling was how Tyler talked about his lifestyle. He didn't describe himself as reckless or thrill-seeking. In his mind, he was simply someone who understood something that others missed, that life wasn't nearly as dangerous or complicated as people made it out to be. He saw worry as a choice, fear as a limitation, and caution as a waste of precious time. People make everything so serious, he'd often say, usually while doing something that made his listeners nervous just watching. Life's supposed to be fun. It's all just a game. You might as well play to win. The morning of September 15th started like any other Saturday for Tyler. He woke up in his Denver apartment with sunlight streaming through windows that offered a perfect view of the Front Range Mountains. Rebecca had stayed over, and she was already awake, scrolling through her phone with that particular expression that meant she was reading something that worried her. "There's a weather advisory for the mountains today," she said without looking up. "High winds? Possible thunderstorms this afternoon?" Tyler stretched, that familiar grin already spreading across his face. Perfect climbing weather then. Nothing like a little excitement to make the day interesting. The plan had been in the works for weeks. Tyler and 3 friends from his climbing club, Ryan, Madison, and Connor, were going to tackle Devil's Backbone, a notorious rock formation about 2 hours west of Denver. It wasn't the most technically difficult climb in Colorado, but it was known for its exposure and the psychological challenge of its long, narrow ridges that dropped away into nothing on both sides. "Maybe you should postpone," Rebecca suggested, finally looking at him with those worried eyes he knew so well. "Just until the weather clears up." Tyler rolled out of bed and began gathering his gear with practiced efficiency. "Come on, babe. We've been planning this for weeks. Besides, weather reports are wrong half the time anyway. It's probably going to be perfect up there." The drive to the trailhead was spectacular, with early morning light painting the mountains, in shades of gold and pink. Tyler drove with one hand on the wheel, the other gesturing as he told stories about previous climbs. His friends laughed at all the right moments, but he caught them glancing at the increasingly ominous clouds building over the peaks. "Looking a little gray up there," Ryan mentioned as they pulled into the parking area. "It's just atmospheric," Tyler replied, shouldering his pack. "Trust me, by the time we get to the technical sections, it'll burn off." The hike to the base of Devil's Backbone took them through dense pine forests and across meadows that were just beginning to show their autumn colors. Tyler set the pace, moving with the easy confidence of someone who had done this hundreds of times. He chatted constantly, turning what could have been a tense preparation into something that felt more like a casual walk with friends. But as they gained elevation, the weather began to shift in ways that even Tyler couldn't ignore. The wind picked up significantly, causing the trees around them to sway and creak. The temperature dropped enough that they all had to add layers. Most concerning, the clouds that had seemed distant and harmless from the parking lot were now, directly overhead, dark and heavy with the promise of rain. "Maybe we should reassess when we get to the base," Madison suggested, her voice slightly raised over the increasing wind. "We're already here," Tyler replied, not breaking stride. "Besides, look at this." He gestured toward Devil's Backbone itself, which was now visible through the trees. A stunning formation of red sandstone that jutted out from the mountainside like the spine of some massive buried creature. "We didn't drive 2 hours to turn around because of a little wind." At the base of the climb, they went through their safety checks with more care than usual. Even Tyler seemed to sense that the conditions demanded extra attention. They tested their radio communication, double-checked their anchor points, and reviewed their planned route up the formation. The climb itself began routinely enough. Devil's Backbone was what climbers called a scramble, technically easy but mentally challenging because of the exposure. The route followed the narrow ridgeline, with drops of several hundred feet on either side. In good weather, it was exhilarating. In deteriorating conditions, it became something else entirely. Tyler led the way, as he always did. His movements were fluid and confident, finding handholds and footholds that seemed to appear just when he needed them. Behind him, his friends followed more cautiously, each taking extra time to secure their positions and communicate with the others. About halfway up the formation, the weather made its intentions clear. The wind became a constant force that required them to brace against the rock face. The first drops of rain began to fall, making the already challenging handholds slippery. Most ominously, they could hear thunder in the distance, still far away but clearly moving in their direction. "Tyler," Connor called from below, his voice tight with concern. "We need to think about turning around. Lightning and exposed ridges don't play well together." Tyler paused on a small ledge and looked back at his friends. They were all watching him with expressions he'd seen before, that mixture of trust and worry that people got when they were counting on his judgment to keep them safe. For just a moment, he felt the weight of that responsibility. But then he looked up at the road ahead. They were more than halfway to the summit. The most challenging sections were behind them, and the way forward looked straightforward. In his mind, they were closer to finishing than to retreating. "We're almost there," he called back. "Another 30 minutes and we'll be at the top. Then it's just a quick descent on the backside." "The weather's getting worse fast," Madison shouted over the wind. Tyler felt that familiar surge of confidence, the same feeling that had carried him through countless situations that had worried everyone else. This was what he lived for. The moment when other people saw obstacles and he saw opportunities. The moment when his ability to stay calm under pressure would get them all safely through a challenging situation. "Look," he called down to them, his voice carrying that easy assurance that had convinced people to follow him up cliff faces and through adventures for years. "I know it looks scary, but we've handled worse than this. Remember that ice climb in January? This is nothing compared to that." He could see them exchanging glances, could practically hear the internal debate each of them was having between their trust in him and their own instincts about the deteriorating conditions. And then Tyler did what Tyler always did. He flashed that confident grin and delivered the line that had become his signature, the phrase that had gotten him through every challenging moment of his life. "Come on, guys," he called out, his voice somehow cutting through the wind and thunder, with absolute certainty. "It's just a game." The words were still hanging in the air when the gust hit. It came from nowhere and everywhere at once, a wall of wind that struck the exposed ridge with the force of a freight train. Tyler felt it, hit him like a physical blow, strong enough to momentarily lift him off the rock face. For the first time in his life, he felt completely out of control, his body moving in ways that had nothing to do with his intentions. In that single second, as he felt his grip on the rock face failing and his body beginning to fall away from the mountain, Tyler Anderson finally understood something that everyone else had been trying to tell him his entire life. This wasn't a game. This had never been a game, and games don't usually end with you falling toward jagged rocks 300 feet below, with enough time to realize exactly how wrong you've been about everything, but not enough time to do anything about it. The last thing he managed to think in that crystalline moment of absolute clarity that sometimes comes just before impact, was how much he wished he could take back every single time he'd said those 4 words. The rescue took 6 hours. Rebecca got the call at 3:17 p.m., just as she was starting to worry about the storm that was now lashing Denver with the full fury that had been building in the mountains all morning. Ryan's voice was barely recognizable through the static and emotion, but the words came through clearly enough. "There's been an accident. Tyler fell. We need help." The next hours blurred together in a nightmare of emergency vehicles, rescue coordinators, and medical teams. Rebecca found herself in the passenger seat of a park service vehicle, racing up mountain roads that were barely passable in the deteriorating weather, listening to radio chatter about helicopter evacuations being impossible due to the storm, and ground teams having to navigate treacherous terrain in conditions that were getting worse by the hour. She learned the details in fragments, pieces of the story emerging through official reports and the traumatized accounts of Tyler's climbing partners. The wind gusts that had caught him at the worst possible moment, the fall that had been stopped not by his safety equipment, which had failed under the extreme forces involved, but by a narrow ledge about 40 feet down the cliff face. The delicate rescue operation that had required teams to rappel down through continuing bad weather to reach him. Tyler survived, but survival and being okay were 2 very different things. The fall had shattered his left leg in 3 places, broken 4 ribs, punctured a lung, and caused a traumatic brain injury that left him unconscious for the first critical days. But perhaps more devastating than the physical injuries was what happened when he finally woke up in the ICU at Denver General Hospital. The man who had lived his entire life without fear was now afraid of everything. The Tyler who had faced every challenge with easy confidence couldn't get through a conversation without panic attacks. The person who had seen life as one grand adventure now couldn't tolerate being alone in a room. Nurses had to remove the mirror from his hospital room because seeing his own reflection, scarred, broken, diminished, sent him into episodes of uncontrollable trembling. "It's like he's a completely different person," Rebecca confided to his parents during one of those long hospital vigils. "He keeps apologizing for everything, for the accident, for worrying us, for being injured, for existing. I've never heard Tyler apologize for anything in his life." The psychological evaluation revealed what everyone had suspected. Tyler was experiencing severe post-traumatic stress disorder, complicated by what the doctors called shattered invincibility syndrome, a condition that sometimes affected people who had lived their entire lives believing they were somehow immune to serious consequences. His entire identity was built around being the person who didn't worry, who didn't get hurt, who always landed on his feet. Dr. Rachel Martinez, his psychiatrist, explained to the family. When that core belief was violently disrupted, it didn't just change how he felt about climbing or extreme sports. It changed how he felt about everything. About getting out of bed, about crossing the street, about whether he can trust his own judgment about anything ever again. The physical recovery was challenging but straightforward. Broken bones heal, lungs recover, scars fade. The psychological recovery was something else entirely. Tyler spent weeks replaying that moment on the cliff face, not just the fall itself, but all the decisions that had led up to it. Every time someone had expressed concern about his approach to risk, every warning he had dismissed, every time he had used that phrase that now made him physically ill to remember. "It's just a game. I could have gotten them all killed," he told Dr. Martinez during one of their sessions, his voice barely above a whisper. Ryan, Madison, Connor, they were all following me up there because they trusted me, because I acted like I knew what I was doing, because I made them believe it was safe. But they weren't hurt, Dr. Martinez reminded him gently. They made it down safely. "No thanks to me," Tyler replied, staring at his hands. "They made it down safely despite me. Despite my arrogance, despite my refusal to take anything seriously, despite 32 years of pretending that consequences were for other people. The hardest part was facing the people who had been part of his story. His climbing partners visited regularly at first, but the conversations were awkward and painful. They kept trying to recreate the easy camaraderie they'd shared. But Tyler couldn't participate in the old banter about adventures and close calls. Every story now sounded to him like evidence of dangerous stupidity rather than exciting memories. "Remember that time in Moab when you free-climbed that overhang without any protection?" Ryan had said during one visit, trying to lift the mood, with a tale that used to be one of Tyler's favorites. Tyler had turned away, unable to hide the expression of horror that crossed his face. "I can't believe I did that," he said quietly. "I can't believe any of us did things like that. What were we thinking?" Eventually, the visits became less frequent, not out of lack of caring, but because everyone could see that trying to connect with the old Tyler was actually making the new Tyler worse. Rebecca stayed, through months of physical therapy, psychiatric appointments, and the slow, painful process of Tyler learning to trust himself to make even basic decisions. She was there when he had to rebuild his relationship with his own body, learning to walk without the unconscious confidence that had always carried him through physical challenges. She was there when he started having nightmares, not just about falling, but about all the other times he could have fallen, should have fallen, might fall in the future. She was there when he decided he needed to make amends, writing letters to everyone he'd ever convinced to join him in risky activities, apologizing for putting them in danger without their fully informed consent. "You don't have to apologize for living your life," Rebecca told him after reading one of these letters. "But I do," Tyler insisted. "Because I wasn't just living my life. I was convincing other people to live it with me, and I never gave them the information they needed to make truly informed decisions. I made everything sound like fun and games, when some of it really wasn't." The transformation was so complete that sometimes Rebecca felt like she was in a relationship with a stranger. The man she had fallen in love with had been fearless, spontaneous, endlessly optimistic about outcomes. This new Tyler was careful to the point of paralysis, planning extensively for scenarios that had a 1% chance of happening, seeing danger in situations that objectively posed minimal risk. But gradually, something more complex began to emerge. Tyler started volunteering with a local organization that provided support for people dealing with traumatic injuries. He found that his experience with overconfidence and its consequences gave him a unique perspective on helping others navigate the psychological aftermath of accidents. "I spent my whole life thinking that fear was the enemy," he told a support group about a year after his accident. "I thought brave people were people who didn't feel afraid. Now I'm learning that maybe brave people are the ones who feel afraid and make good decisions anyway." He became an advocate for climbing safety, not in a preachy way, but through honest conversations about risk assessment and the importance of respecting both the environment and your own limitations. His accident had become something of a cautionary tale in the Colorado climbing community, but Tyler was able to talk about it in ways that didn't just scare people away from the sport, but helped them approach it more thoughtfully. "The mountain doesn't care about your confidence," he would tell new climbers. "It doesn't care about your track record or your natural ability or how many close calls you've survived. Gravity works the same way for everyone, every time. Respect that, and you can have incredible experiences. Ignore it, and you might not get a second chance to learn from your mistake." 2 years after the accident, Tyler and Rebecca were hiking an easy trail in the foothills outside Denver. It was the kind of gentle, well-maintained path that the old Tyler would have considered boring, but the new Tyler found genuinely enjoyable. They stopped at a viewpoint that offered a panoramic view of the Front Range, including Devil's Backbone, in the distance. "Do you ever miss it?" Rebecca asked quietly. "The way you used to be?" Tyler was quiet for a long time, looking out at the mountains that had been such a huge part of his identity. "I miss the simplicity," he finally said. "I miss believing that good things would always happen to me, that I could trust my instincts completely, that the world was basically a safe place if you just approached it with the right attitude." He paused, then continued. "But I don't miss the arrogance. I don't miss putting people in danger without realizing it. And I definitely don't miss thinking that serious situations were just games. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching clouds move across the peaks. Finally, Tyler spoke again. You know what's funny? I used to think that being afraid was the same as being weak. Now I think maybe being afraid is just being awake, being present, being honest about what's actually happening instead of what you wish was happening. As they walked back down the trail, Rebecca noticed something that might have been the most significant change of all. Tyler was still confident in his movements, still comfortable in the mountains, still capable of making good decisions in challenging situations. But now his confidence was based on knowledge, preparation, and respect for consequences, rather than on the magical thinking that had carried him through the first 32 years of his life. The man who had once dismissed everything as just a game had finally learned the most important rule of all. Some things are worth taking seriously, and the people you care about are always at the top of that list. Tyler's story reminds us that confidence without wisdom is just arrogance waiting for a reckoning. Every day we face moments where we can choose between the easy dismissal and the harder truth. That our actions have real consequences, not just for ourselves, but for everyone who trusts us enough to follow our lead. If this story moved you, please subscribe and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Life isn't a game, but that doesn't mean it can't be an incredible adventure when we approach it with both courage and respect. What moment in your life taught you the difference between confidence and recklessness? Share your story in the comments below.